All right. We are doing a live rebuttal of John Oliver's recent video on Medicare for All. And I'll give John Oliver some credit. He is more honest than a lot of people on the left when it comes to this issue. So give him props, although I think he's still wrong in a variety of ways. So let's check this out.
We thought we'd talk about an issue that has dominated the Democratic primary. And I'm not talking about why Tom Steyer doesn't look richer, but why doesn't he, though? His skin's sallow, his clothes don't fit right, and he seems to only have one
So yeah, this is obviously John Oliver's a comedy show, but like the first minute or two, he doesn't really say much. He's slinging them jokes. Something I want to make clear about John Oliver: he is really good at what he does. He's a really good comedian and satirist, despite any disagreements I have with the guy.
What is this man doing with all his fucking money? No, we're not talking about that. Instead, we're going to talk about this.
It's the hot buzz phrase for Democrats running for president, Medicare for All.
We will have Medicare for all.
We have a chance for Medicare for all.
Medicare for all?
Medicare for all.
Now there's a lot of talk about Medicare for all. What does that mean?
Great question from a great judge and an even greater human being. And to answer the question from Ruth Bader Ginsburg's inevitable successor, what is Medicare for all? Well, right now, we have what's called a multi-payer system. What that means is maybe your healthcare is covered by private insurance purchased by you or your employer, or maybe it's covered by a government program like Medicare or Medicaid, or maybe you're one of the 27 million Americans with no insurance.
All right, so someone in the chat is asking, do I find John Oliver funnier than Trevor Noah? Yes, by a lot. I think I like John Oliver a lot of times. He makes some good content. But I do have a point to make about this. So John Oliver is talking about single payer versus multi-payer. I don't like framing the issue in this way. I don't really think it helps. I think it's a distraction that makes the argument about efficiency rather than what's right. I like to frame this issue as how capitalistic and how free the healthcare, health insurance, and medicine industries are, and what we can do to make them as free and as capitalist as possible. And whether or not you want to make a package deal out of healthcare, health insurance, and medicine, or you want to separate them, I think all three are mixed in the way they approach, in their approach. They're all mixed industries. They all have elements of capitalism in the way you can, if you're a doctor, you can open your own business, you can open your own private clinic and whatnot and operate at a profit motive. Intellectual property is protected to a certain extent with the FDA, although they have a really garbage, arbitrary policy when it comes to medical patents. But then again, yeah, that's a way in which we have fascism in these industries. The FDA often locks out competition. They get in bed with pharmaceutical companies who look for favors. You have a lot of socialism in the modern American industry, with Medicare and Medicaid, obviously, and wealth redistribution, and the way, the elderly just get their health, the elderly and the poor get their health care and their medicine subsidized by the taxpayers. And even insurance was very fascistic, going back to World War II with price controls. Isn't it interesting how government intervention always begets more government intervention? And so price controls and tax incentives encouraged employers to get in bed with big insurance companies, which create a lot of distortions. Because if an insurance industry, it's easier for them to just go to a big employer and then sell 10,000 policies in one meeting than it is for them to knock on your door and try to sell a policy that's good for you and your family. Additionally, Oliver is going to make this point. It made people reliant on their employers for health insurance. So if you wanted to leave your job, if you get fired, if you retire, you might lose your health insurance benefits. And this all started because the IRS, I think starting in like 1953, made health insurance benefits exempt from income taxes. And now it created this distortion that gave the government a reason to impose Medicare and Medicaid, which drove up the cost for many other people. Anyways, I'm going off on this long tangent, but the point I'm making is I don't care if single payer becomes de facto because of freedom and capitalism in the economy, then whatever. But I think it should be a multi-payer in the sense that 300 million Americans each buy and pay for their own health care and insurance. And another reason why it's shitty to frame things like this is because who's talking on behalf of the doctors and the hospitals and the care providers and the surgeons and the nurses? Is it single payer? Is it multi-payer? Well, do the doctors get a say? Do they get to decide how much they're willing to sell their goods and services on the market for? Why are we only worrying about how much everyone's paying and not really caring, treating doctors and everyone in the health care industry like they're slaves? Like we can just, tell them how much they're allowed to charge for their services. And that's been a consequence of Medicaid over the last few decades. And it's part of Bernie Sanders' Medicare-for-All policy is a variety of price controls.
Insurance, in which case you're fucked.
What up, Squidward?
The basic idea behind Medicare for All is that all of this will be replaced by a government-funded single-payer program. And the goal of universal healthcare coverage is extremely appealing. Both Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren have put out versions of Medicare for All, but other Democrats have been...
Now, it's unappealing to me, but John Oliver has a point here in that it is very appealing to a lot of Americans because many Americans, they don't really understand philosophy or economics. A lot of Americans are very concrete bound. And I don't mean this to be insulting. It's just, it is what it is. And most people, they see that the current healthcare system is corrupt and there's a lot of problems with it. And there are. And I think a lot of conservatives fail on this end by not acknowledging that there are a lot of problems and corruptions and distortions in American healthcare and insurance. But there are, and a lot of people, they see Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren making all of these grand promises. And, when you've been dealing with a lot of, insurance rates going up, the cost of medicine going up, it's very easy to just throw your hands in the air and say, fuck it, let's let Bernie Sanders take over. Let's do whatever Denmark and France are doing.
Much wary of it, and conservatives absolutely hate the idea.
We cannot afford Medicare for all. This is the end of America as we know it economically.
I think literally 90% of hospitals would go under tomorrow.
Right, Medicare for all. I lived in England, Sean. Nationalized healthcare is a disaster. When rich, famous people get sick, they don't fly to Canada, they don't fly to Cuba, they come here because we have the best medicine in the world.
It is a disaster. So again, you have this goof, Sebastian Gorka. Is that? I'm pretty sure that's him. I'm sorry if I'm confusing him with someone else. But he's talking about NHS, socialized medicine in these countries. They're a disaster, and he's probably right. But why isn't he talking about the socialism that's in modern American medicine? Why isn't he pushing back against Medicare and Medicaid and talking about all of the problems with Medicare and Medicaid and how they drive up prices for non-recipients and results in a lot of waste and fraud? Conservatives don't want to talk about that. And that's another reason why Bernie Sanders and his Medicare for All plan have any legs to stand on, because, hey, we're already giving Medicare to the elderly. Why not expand it to everyone? But conservatives don't want to have that conversation because they're a bunch of cowards.
Look, I will give that man this. America does have one of the best healthcare systems in the world for rich, famous people. Unfortunately, too many people are born in this country with a terrible pre-existing condition called not being Beyonce. Some of us, many of us in fact, are Solange. And for so many Americans, our system is badly broken. And I'm not...
And yeah, John Oliver has a point. There are a lot of problems with the current healthcare industry.
And insurance.
Just talking about the 27 million without health insurance, but the nearly 44 million more who are underinsured. People with...
So, by what standard... Okay.
High deductibles and co-pays that can end up bleeding them dry.
So, John Oliver is right. Co-pays and deductibles and policies have gone up, largely as a result of Obamacare, more government intervention into the industry. Back in 2014, when I bought my first ever health insurance policy as an adult, first off, I got the bargain bin, bottom of the barrel plan. It wasn't a great plan, but I paid $170 a month for this policy. And now 6 years later, I'm paying $250 a month. So I have a shitty policy with high deductibles, and my cost of health insurance has gone up by 50% over 6 years, about 8% a year. But again, why is it? It's because of government regulation. And also, he talks about the underinsured. Is that necessarily a problem for everyone? I mean, I'm sure I'd be considered underinsured, and I could buy a better health insurance policy. I just choose not to. I think a lot of people, you could probably make a case that a lot of people choose not to. Should Americans have the right to be underinsured? You know, I don't plan on having kids, so I don't need an insurance policy that protects me against pregnancy or hospital bills related to pregnancy. So again, by what standard is everyone underinsured? He just throws out all these stats and hopes no one's going to question him on it.
Majority of people who file for bankruptcy cite...
But again, John Oliver doesn't want to discuss why, you know, the regulation that caused this. It's just easier to throw his hands up and say, here, Bernie Sanders, you take over. Yeah, remember Bernie Sanders? Remember when his dumb wife bankrupted a small town college, but a multi-trillion-dollar industry and promising healthcare to 300 million people? No big deal.
Medical expenses as a factor. And you probably already knew that deep down from just how often you see GoFundMe campaigns online from worried parents of sick children or your friend who got a pineapple stuck up his arse and needs help paying the doctors to stop laughing and get it out. And incidentally, for all the
So yeah, if someone sticks a pineapple up their ass, you as the taxpayer should be forced to pay for its removal. And you know, if you have an emergency and he happens to be in front of you in line, then hey, you're equal before the hospital. Now you're all on equal footing as the dumbass who gets a pineapple in his butt.
heartwarming success stories that you see, a study found 90% of crowdfunding campaigns for medical expenses fail to meet their goal. And when they fall short, it can be crushing. Watch as one family struggles to raise $10,000 for expenses arising from their 2-year-old daughter's eye disorder.
Sheila's fundraiser isn't going as well as they'd hoped. About a month in, it's only raised $610. Early morning on the day of Sheila's surgery, her parents...
So look at this family. They seem like they seem to be doing pretty well aside from this emergency. They seem to have a nice house. Seem to have a nice refrigerator, an iPhone. Did I say nice couch? Nice big couch. Now, my point here isn't that, I'm not going to make a Tommy Lahren-like point and say, they should sell their couch and TV before they come to the taxpayers for help. No, what my point here is that if we had a freer market in healthcare, insurance, and medicine, they would probably be more than able to afford good treatment for their child.
Parents are still trying to get the word out.
Okay, so we're gonna make her sign hashtag Eyes for Shayla. Very good.
So John Oliver's he's going to do this a few more times. This is how John Oliver gets his way. He brings in these unfortunate stories, and this is a bad story. I'm not being dismissive of it, and I wish the best for this family, but he brings in these sob stories and says, well, whatever we can do to prevent this is what needs to happen. But again, if there was a freer market in medicine, if we had more capitalism in medicine and insurance, they would probably have more options and it'd probably be more affordable. And since John Oliver is going to bring in sob stories, then maybe I should bring in one. This is from last April 29th. Summer bummer, a young camper's $142,000 snake bite. This is about a 9-year-old who I think was on a field trip, some camping trip, and she got bit by a poisonous snake. And it cost $140,000 to treat it. Now, half the cost was a helicopter ambulance had to come find her in the woods and airlift her out of it. But as the story mentions, first off, I think they paid little for that. I think insurance covered most of it. But here's the point. So, according to the story, Dr. Leslie Boyer, founder founding director of the Viper Institute, a venom research center at the University of Arizona, acknowledges that some of the price in the U.S. can be attributed to the strict Food and Drug Administration requirements for testing and monitoring. This is about the fact that the medicine that they used to treat the snake bite, it was an anti-venom medicine, was like a $5,000 per vial. Where is it? The medicine, the average list price for the medicine that they used was $3,200 per vial. Meanwhile, the story also mentions that there was a Mexican version of this venom medication that only cost $200 per vial. And so this doctor said, well, why does it cost so much for this medicine? The reason why is because our philosopher kings at the FDA are locking competition out of the marketplace. The drug's true effect on the market remains unclear. Crofab and Anavip are not entirely interchangeable. The FDA has not approved Anavip for copperhead bites, for instance. So there you go. It's government intervention driving up the cost, but also, as the story mentions, insurance paid most of this bill, and they negotiated down the cost of the medicine and the other services that the hospital provided. So this is two ways in which government intervention, not capitalism, not greedy capitalism and greedy corporations, woo! It's the FDA locking competition out of the marketplace, and it's the corruption of the insurance industry, which has distorted prices to the point where hospitals and clinics have to overprice and overcharge because they know that insurance companies are going to negotiate these prices down. Whereas if we had a freer market in medicine, if the FDA was not locking competition on the marketplace, which I'll say more on that later in the video, this poor family, might have better options. There'd be more competition. And there you go. But John Oliver would rather just let Bernie Sanders take everything over.
Think about what you're looking at there. It's a pretty dystopian society that we're living in. If your physical and financial well-being depend on whether your crowdfunding campaign can get a signal boost from Jif Pom the Pomeranian. And good luck with that, by the way. I've been trying to get him to post our gerrymandering piece for months now, and he won't do it. Come on, Jif Pom, throw us a fucking bone, you asshole! The point is, any solution that might put an end to that is worth at least considering, sure.
So this is the essence of John Oliver's argument. And this is really the only thing that matters. What he just said. Whatever can be done to prevent this horror story from happening should be considered, even if it means subordinating individual rights, even if it means taking money out of your paycheck, more money out of your paycheck, even if it means enslaving everyone in the healthcare industry by imposing price controls, which that's what price controls are. They are merely a piecemeal form of slavery and telling people that they're not allowed to sell their goods and services at a reasonable price. Whatever can stop this from happening needs to be considered.
And to be honest, I personally think there is a lot to be said for Medicare for All. So tonight, let's take a look at it. Not the politics of whether it can pass, but what it actually is. And whenever the subject comes up, you tend to hear three major criticisms of it concerning cost, wait times, and choice.
Now, John Oliver makes another good point. Cost, wait times, and choice. What argument is missing from this? And it's an argument you don't really hear from the pretenders of capitalism that are known as conservatives. They don't make the moral argument for or against Medicare for All. John Oliver just made the moral argument. Hey, this poor family, they're struggling, and their needs should come before your right to pursue your own happiness. That's what's at stake here. If someone else's needs, if your neighbor's needs come before your right to pursue happiness, then there can't be any freedom in the country. Right? So if someone has a medical emergency and they can't afford it, then your right to keep your money, whether you're saving money, you're trying to put money away to go on the vacation of your dreams, maybe saving away for a vacation home or a retirement home, maybe you're saving money to open a business, maybe you're saving money so that you can leave a job that you hate, whatever it is, Well, that money needs to be taken from you to go pay for this family's medical emergency. Or what if it's a horrible person, right? Is that right? You know, John Oliver likes to bring in these sob stories. What if it's a racist neo-Nazi who can't afford health insurance and gets lung cancer? Is it right to take money out of my paycheck, out of my bank account to pay for his chemotherapy? Even worse, say you're in the say you get a heart attack and you get rushed to the hospital and you have to wait in line behind people like a neo-Nazi or a dirty hippie. I guess dirty hippies, they don't believe in modern medicine, do they? They probably think that drinking tea will fix their knee or whatever. Anyway, you have to wait in line behind people who otherwise might not afford insurance. And not only that, but you're paying for them as they wait in front of you in line. Is that right? Is it right to is it right to enslave everyone in the healthcare industry by imposing price controls? As I just said, you're not allowed to sell your goods and services on the free market, on whatever's left of the free market. Someone's needs becomes before your right to live your life and pursue your own happiness. And what's the point of even living? What's the point of even staying alive if you do not have the freedom and the right to live your life as you see fit?
Let's start with cost, because critics will tell you that Medicare for All will simply increase the federal budget too much.
This sicko socialism would cost roughly $32.6 trillion over 10 years. Even if you doubled tax collections from individuals and corporations, yes, that means you'd be paying twice what you already do in taxes. That still doesn't cover the tab.
And Kennedy's right. First off, again, the $32 trillion is likely to be an underestimation, according to the Mercatus study, which John Oliver is going to cite. And they said in the same report, you're going to need to double individual taxes, and you're going to need to double corporate taxes. So, and you know, you double corporate taxes, what's that going to do? You think corporations are just going to eat that cost? They're probably going to pass that cost on to you, meaning you're buying goods and services from corporations like Walmart, Coca-Cola, Microsoft, Apple, Disney, McDonald's, you name it, Starbucks. Your iced latte in the morning, they're probably going to raise the prices of that to pay for their corporate taxes, or they might get squeezed out of business altogether. They might have to downsize. No one wants to talk about those consequences. So, yeah, that's going to be a huge cost of Medicare for All, amongst a bunch of other things.
My God, free healthcare is expensive.
Look, I know that sounds dramatic, but Sarah Palin's fourth attempt at cloning herself actually has a point there. Medicare for All would undeniably be expensive, but that fact needs a lot of context around it. For starters, it would increase the federal budget, yes, but it would also...
It would nearly double the federal budget. And I'm not attacking a straw man here. I know John Oliver's not making this argument, but I'm saying this because I know a lot of morons are going to get in the comments and try to make this point. Yeah, AOC has made this point like, oh, we have all this money to spend on wars, but not enough money for Medicare for All. How come no one ever makes a big deal about how much wars will... Well, first off, people do make a big deal out of that, you moron. Secondly, even if you reduce the military budget to zero, let's just scrap the whole military. I think it's now at $800 billion in annual spending. The government already operates at a nearly $1 trillion deficit, meaning that if you cut the military, brought all the troops back home, closed all of our military bases, shut down all of our submarines and whatnot, brought everyone back home, you would maybe get to zero at best, in which you would still need to find a way to pick up this $3.2 trillion tab.
Eliminate employer spending on premiums and your spending on out-of-pocket costs. Now, would those balance each other out? That is a good question. The answer is no one can possibly know for sure. There are just too many variables involved.
See, I actually give props to John Oliver for being this honest about it, whereas, you know, a lot of people like Kyle Kalinske like to pretend like, oh, your taxes will go up, but you'll actually be saving money because you're not going to be paying the cost of insurance. He calls it a private tax, which I did a whole video on that dumb concept. But they try to make it sound like, oh, you're actually going to be saving money in the end. Whereas John Oliver is like, well, I actually don't know. It's really hard to say. It might save some people money. It might screw over a lot of other people. This has been a huge controversy over Obamacare. Some people got coverage that they couldn't afford, and other people's insurance rates went through the roof. And other people were in this awkward area where they weren't poor enough to afford the subsidies, yet they weren't making enough money to buy a health insurance policy. So they were getting really screwed by the individual mandate because they had to pay a fine for the crime of not having health insurance.
The Times asked 5 prominent experts to estimate national healthcare spending under Bernie's plan, and they compared that to what we spend now. And the results ranged from it would actually cost us less, to it would cost about the same, to it would cost a fuck of a lot more.
So there we go. We got the Mercatus study. He listed at $3.2 trillion. Again, the author says that it's likely to be an underestimation. It's likely to be a lot higher. And the $3.2 trillion factors in a lot of aggressive estimations, including price controls throughout the entire industry. According to the study, the Medicare-for-All bill would constrain expenditures by subjecting healthcare providers, including hospitals, physicians, and others, to Medicare payment rates. Under current law, Medicare reimburses healthcare providers at much lower rates than private health insurance does. In 2014, Medicare hospital payment rates were 62% of private insurance rates and are currently projected to decline below 60% by the time Medicare-for-All would be implemented. It also says in the study that that they found that in 2019, over 80% of hospitals will lose money by treating Medicare patients. Also, this is a bad way to think about spending in anything. Like, I don't really care how much the collective, how much America pays for healthcare. I care about how much I pay for healthcare and insurance. Imagine applying this standard to, say, automobiles. Imagine a scumbag politician like Bernie Sanders comes along and says, we're spending too much on automobiles. We spend more on automobiles than every other country on earth. So we're going to take over the automobile industry and we're going to make sure everyone pays less for automobile. Well, why is that? Some people spend a lot more on automobiles. Some people, myself, I spent $10,000 on a 2014 Kia Forte. I like it. That's all I really need. Other people want to spend $50,000 on a big pickup truck like a Dodge Ram or a Ford F-150. Other people want to buy fancy convertibles like a Porsche for $100,000. So yeah, some people spend a lot of money on cars and maintenance and whatnot, but that doesn't mean we should just nationalize the entire industry in the name of bringing down costs for everyone. I don't give a shit how much other people spend on their goods and services. I care about how much I spend.
And I know that extra shading does not look like very much, but believe me, it's a fuck of a lot. But look, let's say, just for argument's sake, our overall spending did go up. We would be getting a lot for that money. Remember, 27 million more people would be covered, and they'd be covered well. Bernie's plan is incredibly generous. It covers vision, dental, long-term care, and drugs. In fact, Medicare-for-All is a misleading title because Medicare requires some co-pays and out-of-pocket expenses, and Bernie will excitedly tell you his plan eliminates those.
Under the Medicare-for-All bill that I wrote, premiums are gone. Co-payments are gone. Deductibles are gone.
Innovation, gone. Money from your paycheck, gone. Freedom in America, losing, dwindling away.
All out-of-pocket expenses are gone.
He's right. Hospital bills are gone. Co-payments are gone. Cell phone payments.
Even John Oliver is honest enough to admit that that Medicare-for-All could potentially stifle innovation.
Payments, gone. Flat tires, gone. Geico commercials, gone. All the things you hate in this world will be gone, and all that will remain is universally accessible healthcare and Laura Dern. Finally, life as it should be. Bernie's plan isn't just more generous than most current private insurance plans. It's more generous than the policy of any single-payer country on Earth.
You hear that? It's more generous than every other single-payer policy on Earth. So, again, so much for just wanting to be like Denmark.
And there is a good case to be made that even if national spending wound up higher, we might wind up wasting less. Right now, a lot of our healthcare spending doesn't go to healthcare. It goes to administrative costs that come with having a vast insurance industry.
I think this is a superficial argument over efficiency and wasteful spending. Because according to the Mercatus study, who's studying the Government Accountability Office, found that in 2016, $96 billion in Medicare and Medicaid payments were made in 2016. Doesn't that sound very wasteful? And there are some stories in 2 different books I've read. In Overcharged, Why Americans Are Paying Too Much for Healthcare by Charles Silver. Talks about an epidemic of upcoding where in 2007, after Medicare began subsidizing secondary conditions, hospitals in California, a chain of hospitals in California started diagnosing and treating people with acute heart failure, which was well beyond the national average. So they were saying they were claiming, I think they were claiming to be safe, playing it safe, like, oh, you might have acute heart failure. Let's run some tests. Let's do some X-rays or whatever. And what do they care? What does the customer care? Because they don't care about the cost. The taxpayers are paying it. What does the hospital care? This is another way for them to make money. And in another book, Catastrophic Care by David Goodhill, he talks about a story about some guy who got a wheelchair. I think he had a stroke, and the hospital gave him a wheelchair to take home with him. And he didn't really need the wheelchair, but they said, hey, it's better to be safe than sorry. You might need this, so why don't you take it home anyway? And the guy didn't care because he was a Medicare patient. The taxpayers were paying his bills. And what had happened was this guy had a wheelchair he wasn't using for months. Meanwhile, the hospital was billing him for renting the wheelchair, but he wasn't paying the cost. The taxpayers were. Doesn't it sound pretty wasteful?
It's clearly.
But again, this is the reason why I say it's superficial, because it's not really about efficiency. It's about ending those sob stories that he brings up in this segment.
Wildly inefficient. And consolidating all health insurance under one roof would give the government far more leverage to negotiate prices down. Because look, it is no secret.
Yeah, it will give them a lot more leverage. It's pretty easy to negotiate when you have guns.
Prices for procedures and drugs are out of control in the United States.
He's right.
It is so bad. One insurance provider in Utah recently started offering some of its participants cash if they were willing to travel a little further than their local pharmacy to fill out their prescription.
It's called pharmaceutical tourism. Here's how it works. PEHP puts patients on a plane and flies them to San Diego. From there, a private car takes them across the border to Tijuana, Mexico, where their prescription is waiting for them. The only difference, the prescription costs roughly half the price. PEHP will give people willing to travel an additional $500 back.
It's cheaper for us to pay for the drug down there, send them down there, and then give them $500.
That's fucking crazy! Giving you $500.
So, again, why is it like this? Why are insurance companies putting people on planes and flying them to the border so that they can drive across the border to Mexico? It's like that story I brought up earlier about the venom medication. Why not just ship it like through Amazon or FedEx or UPS? Well, according to the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, in most circumstances, it is illegal for individuals to import drugs into the United States for personal use. And I think additionally, it's illegal to ship prescription drugs. But why not talk about this when you can just throw the car keys to Bernie Sanders and hope he knows how to efficiently run the entire healthcare industry? Now, I know a lot of people like to dive on grenades for agencies like the FDA. Oh, well, if the FDA, if we didn't have an FDA, then greedy corporations would try to sell you fat loss pills that make your hair fall out and turn your skin green. Okay, look, I know you guys, you guys have a negative view of humanity, and you think the best way to make money is to kill your customers and to defraud your customers and to screw them over, which probably explains why you want a philosopher king like Bernie Sanders to manage your finances, because you probably lack the business acumen and instinct to ever cut it on any market society. But okay, let's take your word for it. Greedy corporations, they can't be trusted, so we need philosopher kings at the FDA in Washington to decide which drugs we're allowed to use. Okay, well, this is a consequence. You're going to get stifling innovation. You're going to get you're going to get a lack of competition in the marketplace, and you're going to get pharmaceutical companies getting in bed with the FDA so that they can get favors like locking out competition, so that they can jack up their prices. And there's a long history of this with gout medication, asthma medication, FDA locking out competition, stifling innovation, making it illegal to import drugs from other countries that might be cheaper. Does this sound like consumer protection, creating a society where the price of drugs skyrocket and stifling innovation?
$100 to go to Mexico to buy drugs is not what your insurance provider should be doing. It's what your sketchy friend Meredith should be doing, because she wants to make Brianna's bachelorette party a total rager. I'd go myself, but I have outstanding warrants. Under Medicare for All, the government would be a much stronger negotiator. Now, you wouldn't want it.
Again, yes, it's really easy to negotiate when one party has a gun and the other doesn't.
To set prices so low that it stifles innovation or bankrupts doctors, but that is a balance that you would need to strike. Overall.
See, right there, he's at least he's honest to admit that that this would screw doctors and stifle innovation.
You can't.
And it will.
Definitely say that it would be more expensive, but even if it was, I personally would argue that it's worth it. And either way, cost is a lot more complicated.
So yeah, screwing doctors, stifling innovation, and taking more money out of your paycheck, totally worth it.
An issue than just going on TV and saying $32.6 trillion like Tina Fey.
I'll also give John Oliver credit. He lives up to his own garbage morality, which is altruism, from time to time. I've read stories about how he's bought medical debt and relieved it, and so I wanted to make this point. You know, John Oliver, he thinks it's so noble to help out people who can't afford their bills. Why doesn't he help out that family he mentioned in the beginning of the video? But he does do it from time to time. But it's interesting how our friends on the left often say we need a separation of church and state. It's wrong for government to impose religious morality on the rest of us. But when it comes to Medicare for All, then it's totally okay to impose Christian morality on the rest of society, so long as you don't put Jesus's face or use a religious justification for it. Then it's totally fine imposing morality on other people.
Doing her best Dr. Evil impression. Anyway, the next major criticism of Medicare for All concerns wait times, specifically that it would result in rationing and delays to care.
Yes, it will result in more wait times. And this is simple supply and demand. I don't need to go to a hospital in France and with a stopwatch, and then come back to a hospital here in America with a stopwatch and compare wait times. That's a fact of supply and demand economics, especially when you're dealing with an industry like healthcare, where it's really difficult to expand supply. It's not like Uber, where if you have a short supply of drivers, you can just surge price and hope that a bunch of people will turn on their phones and get on the road. If you want to expand the supply in healthcare, you're going to need to wait 12 years for people to graduate from med school. And this happened even in the United States with Medicare, according to Overcharged by Charles Silver. In the mid-1960s, Medicare and Medicaid extended coverage to tens of millions of additional people, and the demand for healthcare went through the roof. So imagine this, one day, you have your local family doctor, family physician, you go to him, and sometimes he might have to compete for your dollar a little more because maybe he has an open schedule. Either way, doctors and care providers, they have to compete more for your dollar. Now imagine overnight he has more customers because tens of millions of people suddenly got credit cards from the government to go pay for their hospital bills. Now they don't care about what things cost. They can go to the doctor whenever they want. Now, if you're not a Medicare recipient, that's going to drive up costs for you because first off, it's just simple supply and demand. Doctor has less time to see you. And secondly, especially when they get price controls imposed on them, if they have to accept Medicare recipients at a discount, you think your doctor's just going to start eating ramen noodles every night for dinner? No, they're going to probably pass that cost on to you. That's even happened with drug companies who often have to sell their medicine in single-payer countries at a discount. They pass the cost on to American payers and health insurance companies. But from Charles Silver in Overcharged, in the first year of Medicare's operation, the average daily service charge in American hospitals increased by an unprecedented 21.9%. The average compound rate of growth in this figure over the next 5 years was 13%. In the 11 months between the time Medicare was enacted and the time it took effect, the rate increases in physicians' fees more than doubled from 3.8% in 1965 and 7.8% in 1966. The average compound rate of growth in physician fees remained a high 6.8% over the next 5 years. In the first 5 full years of Medicare's operation, total Medicare reimbursements rose 72% from $4.6 billion in 1967 to $7.9 billion in 1971. Over that same period, the number of Medicare enrollees rose by 6% from 19.5 million in 67 to 20.7 million in 1971. So even in America, you have socialism driving up the cost for non-Medicare recipients, and a lot of people get mad at me for making this point. I made this point on Twitter a few weeks ago, and people said, how dare you think of Medicare recipients as stimulating demand? Well, it fucking did. I don't know what you guys want me to say.
If you think it's fun to wait in line at DMV, you're going to love Bernie Sanders' wait times for Medicare-for-All.
Or another example, years ago when I was in college, I worked at Jimmy John's, and on most days, Jimmy John's, for those who don't know, it's a fast food sandwich restaurant. I almost said Subway restaurant. But on most days, it wasn't that busy besides lunch rush. Maybe at most you'd get 10 people in a line, but, again, it's freaky fast. But the day when Jimmy John's, they do this every year, they have Customer Appreciation Day where they sell subs for $1 a piece. And when that happens, there's a line around the block, outside the store and around the block from people who think it's economical to wait in a line for a half hour to buy a $1 sandwich. But again, when people, apply this to grocery shopping. Imagine you gave everyone a credit card backed up by taxpayers to pay their grocery bills. You think there will be much food on the shelves in your local grocery store?
Leads to the kind of care that people now have in England or Canada where you have to wait in line.
Just take a look at Canada or the UK. It means long waiting lines. It means people not getting the health treatments they need.
Okay, I get that no one likes waiting in line for anything. I get it. Most people see the line at Trader Joe's and either abandon their cart or pull the fire alarm and sneak out with their groceries undetected. I'm not saying I've ever done that. I'm just saying I had a show to do tonight, and who wants some peanut butter pretzels? But look, as with cost, comparisons of wait times are very complicated. For one thing, the international wait times that you hear about most often are for non-emergency surgeries, such as knee replacements. And while
So I like how he frames this. Oh, it's for non-emergency surgeries like knee replacement. So what's the big deal? Well, to some people, that might be a very big deal. Okay, yeah, needing a knee replacement, it's not a life or death situation. But what if someone's willing to pay the money to get it done right away? I mean, how much is your life worth to you? You want to deal with not prolonging a knee replacement for 3 months or 6 months or however long it takes. And again, so is it right? So if everyone is equal before the hospital because government is taking it over, so now you got to wait in line behind people who might otherwise have not gotten knee replacements, including people who are total scumbags. Maybe your high school bully, maybe someone who cheated on you in a past relationship, maybe again a white supremacist neo-Nazi who might not otherwise afford to pay for his own knee replacement. Well, now you're paying for his knee replacement, and even worse, you might have to wait behind him in line. But hey, It's not an emergency, so is it really a big deal?
Yes, people in other countries do sometimes have to wait slightly longer for some care. It's not like Americans aren't having to do that right now anyway. Americans are just sometimes forced to wait due to the expense. About half of US adults say they or a family member put off or skipped care in the past year because of the cost. And about 1 in 8 say their medical condition got worse.
So again, this is somewhat of a superficial argument because he's saying, oh, well, wait times, people are waiting anyway because it costs so much. And yeah, again, it does cost so much. So what's the difference? You're waiting because it might hurt your bottom line, or you're waiting because there's a long line because everyone has a right to health care now.
Because of that delay. As for the uninsured, they can wind up having to wait on a literal line, seeking care with age groups like Remote Area Medical, an organisation that travels the country setting up mobile clinics to treat people for free, and which draws massive lines wherever it goes.
Having got their place in line, many camped out for the night. Before dawn, this was the moment they were waiting for.
Number 1, come on down. Number 2, number 3.
One by one, patients are let in for their chance of a visit to a doctor, a dentist, and an optician. At first, Rand focused on communities in remote areas of developing countries. But Stan says he gradually came to realise the depth of need in the US.
Today, 80% or more of what we do is here in the United States.
It's unbelievable to me that is the case. Normally, Americans hate it when a British person comes over to diagnose what's wrong with you. Believe me, 6 seasons of YouTube comments have made that very fucking clear. The internet is mean. And for all critics talk of wait times abroad, it is worth knowing less than 10% of Britons or Canadians say that their health system needs to be rebuilt completely, compared to 23% of people here in the United States. In fact, when London hosted the 2012 Olympics, the opening ceremony featured a 4.5-minute celebration of the National Health Service, featuring swing dancing doctors and nurses.
Well, so what? I mean, this looks like, I guess one could argue that this is a propaganda performance. I mean, if Trump did some shit like this with the military or the police, then I doubt John. Oh, well, he makes a good point. It's one hell of a show at the Olympics.
And children jumping up and down on hospital.
I mean, this shit happens in North Korea.
Hospital beds.
I forget what it was called. There was a whole documentary about it. How there's this annual event in North Korea where people do these amazing stage shows. I can't remember what it's called. But it was an impressive show, all in honor of the dear leader Kim Jong-un.
As for Canada,
they really love Kim Jong-un in North Korea, guys.
They adore their health service so much that when they had a contest for the greatest Canadian of all time, this was the result.
The greatest Canadian, as decided by you, is
Tommy!
The mother of all national titles goes to the father of Medicare.
Yeah! Tommy Douglas! Yeah! Woo!
So, does John Oliver think this is an argument? Appeal to the masses? Godwin's Law Alert. Yeah, Hitler was popular too amongst Germans at once upon a time. And again, everyone in North Korea loves Kim Jong-un.
I mean, his master's thesis, The Problems of the Subnormal Family, endorsed eugenics, but we're going to ignore that because it was the 1930s and no one's perfect. Give it up for Tommy! Woo! And look, then there is the final big criticism of Medicare for All, which involves choice. Specifically, that it would take away our ability to choose the sort of health coverage that we receive.
When I hear that health care is a right, what I hear is healthcare will no longer have choices.
Under Medicare for All, your choice of health coverage disappears.
Americans are still Americans. We're not socialists, we're not communists, we like choice. And we like to have choice in healthcare, especially.
As someone pointed out, Hitler was made Time Person of the Year by Time Magazine. Yeah, and Germans loved him, so he must have been good, right, John Oliver?
Right. Americans are...
Although I guess he kind of dismissed his own point by saying, oh, well, the Canadian guy believed in eugenics, but hey, no one's perfect.
Americans, it's true. And they do like having choices. It's why the #1 rated series on Netflix is 40 minutes of looking through the menu for something good. It's basically America's new national pastime. And the fact you're applauding that is a full cosign on that concept. But the fact is our current...
Yeah, choice is bad because you might spend 40 minutes looking for something to watch on Netflix. What a dunk.
System limits Americans' choices far more than it expands them. For starters, as a practical matter, most of us don't choose our health insurance. We get what we get through our employer. And because of that...
And John Oliver is right. And why is it like this? It's because of fascist policies around World War II that encouraged big employers, large employers, and insurance companies to get in bed with one another. And as a result, it distorted many aspects of the healthcare and health insurance industries, drove up costs, made people reliant on their employer for health insurance, discouraged competition in the marketplace. According to both Overcharged and I think Don Watkins mentions in his book Roosevelt Care, if I recall correctly, before World War II, most medical expenses were paid out of pocket. Health insurance was not that prevalent. And healthcare was a lot more affordable back then. And even then, that was in the Great Depression. But hey, government started, incentivizing, again, health insurance and employers to get in bed with one another. Creates a lot of distortions. They started subsidizing with Medicare and Medicaid, more regulations with Obamacare, FDA driving up costs by locking out competition. This is all a result of government intervention in healthcare and health insurance. And the solution is more government intervention, apparently.
Choices like changing jobs can become significantly harder, and not just that. Oftentimes, your choice of doctors and hospitals is severely limited by which ones your insurance will cover.
And I'm sorry if I keep repeating these points, but it's worth noting that conservatives are total pansies on issues like this. And you don't have to look... George W. Bush expanded Medicaid Part D during his presidency. And then after Obamacare passed, Republicans rant and raved, and they stamped their little feet saying how horrible Obamacare was, and it was. And they said, give us the House, give us the Senate, give us the Oval Office, we'll repeal it, we'll get rid of that nasty Obamacare. In 2016, they get the presidency, the Senate, and the Congress, and the House of Representatives. And what do? They introduce a bill that half-ass repeals Obamacare at best. It was completely watered down, and they couldn't even pass that. And they defend the status quo as if we have this amazing laissez-faire capitalist system in healthcare and health insurance, when we fucking don't.
Out of your insurance network can be prohibitively expensive. That is why people bend over backwards to stay in network. And even when they do that, it can still all go horribly wrong.
Someone does say it is pretty hard to find interesting to binge on Netflix. Yeah, sometimes it is a pain in the ass to watch something on Netflix, but Netflix has created a lot of good content and delivered a lot of good content at a low price. If the problem with Netflix is you might have a hard time choosing what you want to watch, it's probably a good problem.
While
Better than watching nothing.
campaigning in 2018,
I know you guys know that, but
Democratic Congresswoman Katie Porter's appendix burst. Her first thought, how much would it cost?
I didn't call an ambulance because I knew it can cost a lot if you call an ambulance. And I had specifically had my manager drive me not to the closest hospital, but to the in-network hospital.
Even though the hospital was in her network, the surgeon who helped save Porter's life was not, and she got a bill for nearly $3,000.
Exactly.
Again, John Oliver bringing a sob story, but again, imagine she was rushed to the hospital and there was a long wait, and she had to wait behind scumbags like white supremacists and wife-beating drunks and dirty hippies and deadbeats who are on the same footing as her.
Get fucked by taking an ambulance. You can get fucked by going to the wrong hospital, or you can get fucked by going to the right hospital but getting the wrong surgeon. The American healthcare system gives you so many choices as to how you want to get fucked. It truly is the Kama Sutra of healthcare. And under Medicare-for-All, that scenario would not happen. No doctor would be out of network, because there wouldn't be a network at all. And the truth about Americans' current illusion of choice is that too often, because of cost, the choices our current system forces people to make are ones like this.
I prioritize the heart stuff over the insulin because the heart stuff is more immediate. I know over time.
And this is another sob story about rising costs of medicine. And yeah, it is a problem, but she might not have this problem if there was more competition in the marketplace instead of these dipshit philosopher kings deciding which medications we get to use. And especially if you're a pharmaceutical company, what's an easier way to make money? You really want to spend 20 years and millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in research when it's not a guarantee that your product won't make it to market because the FDA won't allow it? Or would you rather hire some lobbyists and schmooze with some bureaucrats at the FDA and talk them into maintaining your bullshit patent over a drug that already exists? And I'm not anti-intellectual property. I'm just saying that the patent policy I don't even know if the FDA should be issuing patents. I don't know why you wouldn't just leave that to the trademark and patent office that handles everything else. But the FDA's policy on issuing patents is garbage.
Oh, diabetes will kill me, but it'll take a longer time. And I know that without the heart failure drugs...
And DDV Show makes a good point. He says he might have to get an MRI, and that costs up to $3,000. And he also goes on to say if healthcare were a true free market, he might have an IR. I'm sure the MRI would cost $5 in a coat. Yeah, it's possible.
I only have 13%
Hell, if we had a free market in medicine, we might have Baymax from Big Hero 6, the friendly robot that can that can give you X-rays and detect a disease by like touching your hand or whatever. Of course, a dipshit conservative like Tucker Carlson would probably decry Baymax because he would eliminate jobs.
Of my heart. I don't want to play with that.
That's obviously terrible. A humane healthcare system should not require people to pick their favourite organ. Although, for the record, if you're ever asking me my favourite organ, I'm going spleen every time. Now, I know the brain and the heart get all the attention, but I'm telling you, when it comes to filtering blood, you can't go wrong with a spleen. Hashtag I'm a spleen stan. Hashtag yeah, spleen. So those are the three main criticisms of Medicare-for-All. And I should say, it is not just people on the right who raise them. Some Democrats have reservations too. Pete Buttigieg, for instance, prefers a different concept to Medicare-for-All, but with a catchily similar name.
My healthcare vision is Medicare for all who want it. Let every American have the choice to walk away from the corporate private plans and towards something better. But when they're ready, because I trust Americans to make that right choice.
Okay, well, hold on there. You trust Americans to make the right choice? You know Americans choose to drink Bud Light, right? Which doesn't taste like beer, so much as it tastes like if beer somehow died and was discovered in its apartment 3 weeks later. But what Buttigieg is referring to when he says Medicare for all who want it is basically the public option. That is where the government...
It's amazing that he brings up beer because if we ever get Medicare for all, I know this happens in some European countries. This happened in Denmark. Years ago, they introduced a fat tax in Denmark because obesity and related illnesses were becoming an issue. And it was becoming a drain on Denmark's socialized healthcare system. And so they imposed taxes to discourage unhealthy eating. Of course, this failed. The Danes would just drive over the border to Germany to buy all their bacon and cupcakes or whatever. And so they eventually scrapped it. But you're going to see that in America. When obesity or smoking related illnesses or alcohol related illnesses become a political issue, you're gonna get politicians who are gonna regulate, if not tax, products like alcohol and cupcakes and bacon cheeseburgers out of existence. I mean, this already happens. Mike Bloomberg did it a few years ago when he was mayor of New York. Introduced a soda tax. Because that's the role of government, is to make sure you're eating healthy.
It doesn't replace the private insurance system. It just introduces its own plan that would compete with it. And it would definitely be an...
Vagar says that they introduced a sugar tax over two for the same... See, yeah, you're going to get more. You guys like eating delicious foods? You ever scrolling through Facebook or Instagram and you see those flashy recipe videos like how to make a delicious, beautiful cake? It's the best cake. Well, you might have to say goodbye to that once Medicare for all comes into existence.
Improvement over what we have now. The problem is it would leave so much of our current insurance infrastructure with all of its problems intact. So that's kind of like being offered either a shit sandwich or a slightly smaller shit sandwich with guac. I mean, I guess I'll take the second one if you're asking, but honestly, the lack of guac wasn't really my main fucking concern. And
yeah, John, his comparison isn't wrong. What we have today is shit, and the solution that we're offered is even shittier. How about instead of a shit sandwich, we get a delicious a mozzarella stick and chicken wing sandwich from Fat Sal's. That's what I want.
I'm not saying.
Or a nice, delicious meatball sub.
Any of this would be easy. A lot would have to be figured out, from how to impose the taxes to pay for it in an equitable way, to the consequences of eliminating the entire private health insurance industry, which by one estimate could displace 1.8 million workers. That is a...
So, again, at least John Oliver is honest enough to talk about this point. 1.8 million jobs in the health insurance industry that will just be wiped away. But it's interesting that he kind of just glosses over this point. He'll bring in the sob stories about all these people that are struggling to pay for their medical bills and pay for their medicine, and that is bad. But then when it comes to displacing 1.8 million people, throwing them out of the workforce and saying, tough luck, we need healthcare as a right now, so your services are no longer needed. Go learn to code. Go find something else to do. Just kind of glosses over it like it's not really a big deal.
Legitimate thing to be concerned about. And any plan would have to be designed and rolled out very, very carefully. That is why both Warren and Sanders talk about the need.
By the way, if you pay attention to a lot of these Bernie bros and bread tubers who talk about this, they're happy to throw all these people out of work.
For transition plans for workers.
Like some of them were very against Elizabeth Warren when she walked back. I don't know if she walked back, but she didn't want to outlaw private insurance. A lot of these people want to outlaw private insurance because it's so immoral to make money off of emergencies and sick people. And that's another notion that needs to go. Oh, we can't. Is it right for people to make money off of the sick and off of people who have an emergency? And I say, look, if someone wants to cure cancer, someone wants to invent a cure for cancer and wants to make $50 billion doing so, I say, great, that guy's a hero. He cured cancer. And $50 billion is probably a small reward in comparison to what he did. And best of all, I get to worry less about dying from cancer. Win-win.
In their proposals. And I get...
So I think I know Oliver is not making this point, but I think the fundamental here is that it's a disdain for the profit motive. Making money is what's immoral.
Big change is scary. It is human nature to prefer the devil you know over an uncertain alternative. But the devil you know is still a devil. And it is easy to forget that. I shit on Britain a lot on this show. And I'm not going to stop anytime soon. But one thing Britain does well is the National Health Service. It's not perfect, of course. I'm not going to swing dance on a fucking...
Now, it's interesting that John Oliver, gets on his knees for the NHS and talks about how wonderful it is. Again, at least he's honest enough to say, hey, there's problems with it. But notice how he brings in all these sob stories to paint a picture. What about that story about the NHS that wouldn't let the family leave and bring their kid to America for experimental treatment? Wasn't that a pretty big story? Wasn't that a pretty big sob story? This is what we have to look forward to, not being able to leave the country for an experimentation operation in another country. John Oliver seemed to forget that sob story.
Bad about it, but I will be honest with you, I've never had a bad experience, and I don't know anyone who has. But since moving to America, I don't think I've met anyone who doesn't have at least one insurance industry horror story. At this point, the US national anthem should just be everyone in the stadium yelling about their insurance company for 2.5 minutes. So for what it is worth, personally, I'm in favour of some version of carefully designed universal health coverage. And I will own all the things about it that are difficult, including the fact that politically it would be incredibly hard to get past. But in return, anyone who is resistant to significant change is going to have to own all the flaws of our current system. One in which when Americans get sick, they can find themselves comparison shopping with a burst appendix, flipping a coin between life-saving medications, and praying they can come up with a catchy enough hashtag to cover their care.
Although, for what it's worth on that one, until we fix this fucking mess, if anyone gets a ruptured spleen, please feel free to use...
So, again, John Oliver makes a pretty good point at the end. Yeah, whoever defends the current system has to own all the problems with it. And he's like, look, I'm willing to own the consequences, the bad consequences of socialized medicine. And this is a bigger problem, is the so-called defenders of capitalism, the pretenders of capitalism. They don't have a vision. They just defend whatever the status quo is. They don't offer free market capitalism and all the endless possibilities of if we freed up our healthcare and health insurance industries. They don't make the moral argument. Is it right to force people? Does someone's needs place a claim on your right? Additionally, the cost of healthcare and insurance have gone through the roof because of government intervention in these industries, and we should be looking to free up these industries as much as possible, because the moral is the practical. If we have more competition, if doctors had to fight over your dollar, if pharmaceutical companies had to fight over your dollar instead of looking for favors from politicians, then perhaps one day we would get a lot more innovation and a lot better healthcare at a lower cost.